going to start with the last session of today. I mean, if you're not counting the drinks afterwards as a separate session. We're going to have two short talks now, and then the last, let's say, full talk where a duo will be presenting. It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Oscar Pastor from the University of Valencia for the first short talk.
Okay, thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation to transmit in a short time, 15 minutes. But as we say in Spain, it's much better than nothing. I have to be fast and not making too much jokes because I don't have time for it. But just let me summarize. We have tried to summarize in the title that has a mistake. I was just changing the slide. Business is without the double E's. The typical thing that I tell my students always. Take care with the title, because if it's wrong, it's the first thing that everybody is going to see. So just here I have this case. But what we want to transmit you is this idea of business process management in practice, improving quality through a joint academia industry effort. There are two things here. First, the idea of BPM in practice. We are strongly working in how to make things better from a practical perspective. We work with people that are good, from our point of view, the best one, at least at the Spanish level, in industry, that have sound tools, that are successful with their tools. And from our more academic, theoretical perspective, what we want to know is to preserving what they are doing, to try to give ideas to let them do things still better. So this is the first point, BPM in practice. And the second one, as I was telling, is how to work together, academia and industry, that I think that at European level is what we should do. There is no strong science, strong technology, if these two parts of the play are working together. And I think that we have the example of the United States, and if we want to be really hard from the European perspective, we have to achieve a strong level working together, both industry and academia. This should, I'm doing something. Okay, so three very basic points. Here we have two actors, myself, the PROS Research Center of the Universitat Politecnica de Valencia. Second, the industry, our industrial partner, TimeProcess, a company led by my colleague, Rafael Montes, that is just here. And our joint challenge, that is in fact a new spin-off, a new company that is being created as a joint effort that is called Technogram. I'm going just to explain that and to fix the ideas that are behind the two actors and the new thing that we are doing together. PROS is just a research center that I am very proud to lead by now in the University Politecnica de Valencia. This is the way in which research is structured by research centers, research institute. I am going to be fast in that because the mission and the vision is important maybe to emphasize that we work from an information system perspective. Conceptual modeling, model-driven development is our main challenge. This is why we want to improve software production methods through the use of model-driven technologies. The vision is to do it well, to do it as better as possible. This is why we talk always about the highest level of excellence and so on. This is at least what we try to do. Okay, I will just jump at this because we want to do a high quality technology transfer, and this is why we try to be more worried about having private funding than public funding. Because if we have a company that is investing money in what we do, we feel proud that at least they believe that it's worth working with us, and this is a very clear proof of interest. As I told you, we work from the information system engineering perspective within a model-driven software development approach. We want to train the best researchers. We know that we work in the university, and this is all presenting what we are going to tell you, because we want to help people that do things well in practice, and this is just the limit of our work. Okay, research project and dissemination is a natural consequence of that. Now we have 53 members. We are surviving under the crisis that all of you know for sure that we have in our country. But I think as we have a lot of private funding and we are working on the international level, so I think that we survive, at least until now, we survive reasonably well. Okay, this is our structure. I think that it makes not too much sense to continue on that. These are our main keywords: models, abstraction, methods, model-driven code generation, technology, in the independence of the technology, because we want to provide models, conceptual models that are free from a particular platform. So what we want to guarantee is that we provide models, conceptual models that collect the knowledge of an organization. And this is what more concretely is represented in this figure, where we just interpret the model-driven architecture standard to our purpose, where we have this part that is the part related to business process modeling, requirements engineering, and we try to go from here to the software product in a way that have as much automation as possible. And this is our main work, to try to define different levels of abstraction with model transformations that are clearly, precisely defined. Okay, so this is our research areas, and I will just focus on two parts, process management and business process modeling, enterprise alignment, and requirements engineering, that during the last year are becoming one of the most important part of our scientific strategy. This means that under what I showed you before, we want to be sure there are many works that are producing software in some way from conceptual schemas to a final application. We want to enter this problem of enterprise alignment, being sure that what we have here is the representation of the right organization, the right requirements that the customers of the organization, of the process, the business processes that are being modeled really have in practice. So, said that, I mean, I should just move to our second part, TimeProcess, that is a company that, from our perspective, when we joined them, was because it was the best tool that was dealing with the problem of making a tangible reality project management issue. It's a tool, TimeProcess, where there is a very interesting mix of method and technology. And when we were just analyzing the tool, we saw a tool that is, I mean, the thing, Rafa could give you references about big customers that they have. It's a company that is just selling its product successfully in the last years. So they have a strong practical background on how to deal with this context in practice. And what we wanted to do together, as I told you at the beginning, was just this idea of, okay, let's work together. Let's see what aspects could be improved, in which way they could be improved, and if there is space for that, let's do something together. And we reached to this last point of doing something together, as I will comment very soon. So the thing, this is maybe the most important thing. I mean, TimeProcess plus PROS is Technogram. Technogram is the name of the new company, the spin-off that we are working on together. I mean, the practice, for us, the first point was to find a successful process management tool that was TimeProcess, an industrial tool. I mean, as I was telling you, if you want to have any detail about it, Rafa is the right person, is the director of the company, so he can give you any detail related to how the tool performs in practice. Our perspective was a theoretical one. It was, okay, we are teaching our master and doctoral students how to apply sound information system principles for constructing effective and efficient process management tools as TimeProcess. So the immediate question or problem was that one, how to improve the quality of an already existing and successful project management tool. Okay, I mean, we were working together, now we are working together for 1 year, a little bit more than 1 year, and we have a lot of results. And this set of results is what is leading us to go on, to go further with the technogram that I will show you for finishing the presentation and being right with Theresa. I told her, where are you, Theresa? I told her to take me out if I just go out of her time. So the three main points were the ontological commitment. How could we help TimeProcess to be better? We were talking something about Manfred in his talk, was talking also this morning, how to improve the definition, the identification, the specification of a process model abstractions. It's very important to be very clear about the concepts that we are talking when we are managing a tool, because only we have a clear conceptual basis, a clear ontological commitment, we can discuss with others about how we are managing these concepts. A consequence of that was also commented with Manfred was the analysis of advanced user interfaces with the intention of creating and visualizing these process model abstractions in a nice way, not only nice, in a really visualizing way. Something that customers could say, oh my God, this is really nice. I should be something really advanced. We are, and this is the part of our proposal, we are using meta-modeling techniques for having an effective tool support. We could give a lot of details of that. You are invited to contact us if you want to know more about it. And also a model-driven development techniques for assessing the correctness between the concepts that we have fixed and the software representations that a user finds in the corresponding tool. All that leads us to the final point, that is an advanced process data management and a way of ensuring that the tool is providing a high-performance query environment. Okay, so this is 3 slides of technogram. I will just go to the last this one and the last one. This is the structure. Maybe this one is more clear. You have here technogram, that is the result of the joint effort of our research center, TimeProcess, that is the tool, and Principia Tech, that is a group of the university that is just looking for a good context for investment. What is called is under the notion of business angels. They are providing the funding. They are looking for good ideas, and they provide the background to be able to create an enterprise environment. As you see here, Principia Tech, what is doing is providing the ways of finding the capital and the know-how about technology companies, incorporating existing client bases. In this case, it's not so complicated because TimeProcess is already there, so their set of customers is important, and some of them that are key customers are being reoriented to the idea of technogram. So in this case, all the things that I were telling you, the specification of the ontological background, the definition of the advanced user interface context, the definition of a new query-oriented set of facilities is directed to the creation of this company, where we are providing all these research and development resources intended to provide high productivity through the properties that I was sharing with you, and TimeProcess, that is providing the technological basis and all the know-how in practical terms. Okay, and this is basically the thing. I go back to just to indicate that here there is a very nice structure where we have here through an agreement with the university, our research center is working in this company as a kind of a research and development department that is fully defined and specified by contract, and this is the way in which the research center is participating in the company. The new versions of the product are just ready to be to guide the evolution of the former TimeProcess that is still working, but that under our new context is just intended to have more capabilities and to be improved in a substantial way. And the final perspective is that one. I think that this is the image of software engineering nowadays, where you have offers, you have many people selling many things, and where it's very difficult to understand why a given method is better than other. I think that from our academic perspective, the answer to this question is to do what we are doing with TimeProcess, to provide concepts, to provide criteria, to provide a systematic approach and a methodological guidance to be sure that the product that is obtained is just step by step making things better. So thank you very much, and more or less just in time.
Very nice. Thank you. Okay, the next speaker is Theresa Schmiedel. She's from the University of Liechtenstein. Let's see if the system is working. Sorry. USB, where should USB?
I think there.
There it is. Yeah.
Thank you. So, thank you very much for the kind invitation, Hajo and Will, for having me here to present and speak to you about an organizational approach to BPM. And I'll provide you with an overview of how we approach BPM and also give you examples of some culture studies which we conducted recently. My talk is structured in 3 parts. I'll briefly give you an overview where I'm from, what our understanding of BPM is, and then I'll talk about the culture fitness studies. So first of all, Liechtenstein looks slightly different than the Netherlands. It's, for those of you who don't know, it's between Switzerland and Austria. I didn't always know, and it's 20 kilometers long, 5 kilometers broad, 35,000 inhabitants. That's the university. It's not a skiing resort, but it's actually the university. And that's the team where I'm part of. So in the middle you might recognize Jan van Pokke, which is the head of the institute. And we have a lot of cooperations with the local industry, but also international. And we have a couple of competence centers on different topics. So for example, business process management, enterprise content management, in-memory technology, and enterprise resource planning. And today, of course, I'll focus on our research field and public transfer, practice transfer in business process management. And yeah, that leads me directly to give you an overview of how we approach BPM. So some of you might know this. This is the maturity model of BPM, which was developed by Roseman and De Bruyn. And it basically consists of 6 core elements of BPM. And it's interesting today to see there's, of course, in the middle, a very important part about methods, modeling, and also IT. But then there are completely different parts also. And if you look to the left side, you see strategic alignment is one of those core factors. And so, for example, that means you can imagine an organization focuses maybe on cost leadership or quality leadership in the industry. And then if you change your processes, you cannot change them in any direction, but it should be in alignment with the overall strategy of the organization. So that makes completely sense, but I think it's a point one needs to be aware of. And another important factor is governance. And so there, for example, one should think about where's the BPM approach actually, by whom is it driven? Is it an IT side-driven approach? Is it driven by the business? Or is there something like a center of excellence, maybe? So these are questions on that side. Then, if you look at the other side, you see people and culture also play a role. So people, there you can think of the HR department. What kind of skills are actually needed to conduct BPM approaches in an organization? And then, of course, and that's what I will talk to you about today, is there's the culture column. as an important element. And yeah, you might have heard of the BPM handbook that has been published by Jan van Brocke and Michael Rosemann. And this is also structured according to these 6 core elements of the BPM maturity model. And you might recognize some authors here. These are just, it's just a short overview. Of course, there are many more authors in the handbook. Now let's come to that culture column. To give you another motivation of the topic, I have a little comic here. She says, I'm Anna, the analytical side of BPM, and I'm Emo, the emotional side. We're twins, but I talk about the tools and modeling and the technologies, and I talk about the organization and culture. My part is the most important part, and there they slightly disagree. Then he goes on, BPM is really cool, you analyze, you model, and you buy a BPMS to do processes, and don't forget the people. You make pretty pictures, and all your data is integrated, and the platforms are for when. What about the people? You buy your tools, and what about the people? And there, yeah, okay, he quits. And that is actually a nice example of what we came to realize when we looked more closely into the topic. You find statements like cultural resistance is the main cause of BPM project failure, BPM adoption inevitably forces cultural change, the approach to BPM should fit the culture of the organization, and so on. You find many statements about culture, but then how can we get beyond that? How can we get beyond stating that it's some kind of important part of BPM? And before I provide you an overview of how we structure all these different statements on culture, I'd like to briefly introduce to you how we understand the concept of culture. So, if there's a person, he or she can have several cultural identities. Belongs to a nation, an organization, a department, a profession, and so on. And these are all cultural groups. And each of these groups has a specific value set that they share. So the first important point is each group has a certain culture, whether they are aware of it or not. Then the second important point about the concept, you might know that iceberg model. The biggest part of culture is underneath the surface, and that's the values that people are aware of, do share, but they might not be aware of it. So it's underlying assumptions underneath the surface, what makes up culture. And those values, they become visible above the surface in actions and structures. And you can imagine all kinds of actions, routines, behavior, rituals, or structures, like technology also, mission statements, and so on. And the idea is that those invisible values become visible in actions and structures. Now, against the background of this understanding of culture, I try to structure all these different recognitions of culture in BPM. And there are authors in the literature who recognize something called a BPM culture. And that's defined as a culture that is supportive of a BPM approach. Okay, so that means when you start a BPM initiative in your organization, then the BPM culture that supports this approach is the to-be culture. But actually, at the very start, you would face a cultural context that is just given in an organization, and that consists of many different cultural groups. So for example, there are different nations in an organization, there's the organizational culture itself, there are different work group cultures, and so on. And that's all complexly intertwined, and that's the given cultural environment of an organization. And in order now for a BPM approach, an initiative to be successful, the idea is that there must be some kind of cultural fit between this to-be culture and the cultural context. Okay, let's focus on what exactly is that BPM culture. which values are actually supportive of BPM. And what we did was, we did a big Delphi study with 27 participants from 13 countries. We had independent coders, 12 weeks, very long and intensive process of examining what are those values that make up such a supportive culture. And yeah, so that's the explicit question we asked in one of in the very first round, and which we examined with all these experts from both research and so the academic world and practice. And that's what we came up with. So it's important value to have customer orientation, to be excellent in the sense that you continuously improve and innovate, that you're responsible. That means that you show both commitment for process objectives and are also accountable for process decisions. And then teamwork primarily refers to this cross-functional orientation between departments. So that was the consensus which was reached between all these different experts around the world when we asked them what are those values that make up such a supportive culture. And now, how can those values support BPM practice? And we continued our studies, and again, that was an intensive process over 8 months. We did interviews, surveys, workshops with experts from around the world. And what we came up with was a tool to measure those 4 identified BPM supportive values. And that tool, that's a screenshot, is available both in German and English. It asks you some general statistical background of the company, and then you answer a whole bunch of questions, and in the end, you will receive your kind of personal assessment results based on the answers that you've given. And so that's an example of the individual report that you get immediately after filling out the survey. But what happened is many organizations have approached us and said it's not enough for us to have one person filling that out and have their opinion about the culture in this result. We want to have a deeper analysis. And so we had follow-up studies with Lufthansa, Landesbank, Oerlikon, and so on. Quite a couple of organizations already, when you think of that the study had only started 3 months ago or so. And now the question is, how does that tool support those organizations? What can they learn from having a deeper analysis of their culture? And first of all, of course, they would identify cultural gaps. So they would get a report on how far they are actually customer-oriented. And then they could develop strategies based on these gaps that they identified, and could implement measures to fill these gaps. And I'll give you a brief example here. That's a real example from one of those companies I showed you the logos of. And you see that the blue line shows the evaluation of the organization itself. So they were pretty, how you say that? It was all just about a medium evaluation of their culture. And the red, yellow, and green shows you the average top and the overall average of the industry and the average worst companies. And based on these results, for example, the organization decided to focus on primarily 3 culture dimensions. So first of all on the commitment, then on the continuous improvement and innovation part, because there they are below the average of the industry sector. So that was their strategic decision to start working on these cultural fields primarily. And based on that, they're currently trying to develop activities that they can realize to fill this gap and make their overall culture more supportive for the BPM approach. And that's the vision, that in the end they would have Anna and Imo agree. And yeah, if you have questions or would like to discuss any of those organizational issues of BPM, I would be happy to do so. Thanks.
Okay, then we have arrived at the last duo presentation of today. Two persons will give a duo presentations who I know personally very well. They're very influential both in my professional life. They're very good speakers, and they're also both my bosses, so it's in my contract to say this. Will kick off, followed by John.
Thank you very much, Hajo. I think given your kind of position in between industry and academia, you are the perfect chair for a day like this. So perhaps I should start by thanking all of you for coming here, especially the people that come from other countries. And let me also say a bit about the background of this initiative. There is the EIT Institute, which is a European institute that has several, let's say, institutes. ICT Labs is one of them. And they are trying to promote the valorization of research results. So how is there a transfer from what is happening at universities and research centers, and how does that lead to economic activity? And if you look at the BPM area, it's very clear that Europe is leading in the BPM area if it comes to research, etc. But I think it's very important to transfer this into, let's say, economic success. And that is, I think, why this is a very good day, and that it's very nice to see that all around Europe there are, let's say, 20 of such roundtables that are meeting people from academia and industry. And if we join forces and become more visible, I think we can also have much more impact and much more success if we stick together. So I think that's one of the reasons why we have the meeting of today. Now I would like to focus on the kind of our collaboration with Perceptive. So I would first kind of give a brief history and then my view on things, and then John takes over and tells about his, let's say, ideas and the things he would like to implement in Perceptive. So what you see here is a kind of timeline. So in 1993, I think I started working on workflow here at the university before I'd been working on other things. And John Hoogland and Paul Beres, they established the company called Pallas Athena. And immediately they were very successful because they made a modeler called Protos. And in a couple of years, it was by far the most used modeler in the Netherlands. It was also based on PetriNets, which made it very natural for us to work together with them. So one of the first things that we did is we made all kinds of links between their Protos software, which is kind of one of the most successful modeling tools in the Netherlands, used by, for example, I think there's a market share of 80% under Dutch municipalities, just to get an idea of the impact of this tool. And we took the tool and we tried to extract it to do all kinds of analysis. So using our simulation tools, using our verification tool, Waflan. Then we stayed in touch for various things. I think this is a very interesting table. I think everybody here in the room knows the workflow patterns. And here you can see the result of a debate between me and John Hoogland. So we thought that this was the support of the patterns by a tool called Flower. And this was the view of Paul, or Pallas Athena. And I think we learned both a lot, let's say, from this interaction and these different views. What is also kind of very important to mention is today many people talk about case management, adaptive case management, etc., but it's important to realize that in the Flower system this was already implemented a very long time ago, and there was even a system before Echo, where these people were involved, where all of these concepts were already in there. We collaborated, let's say, on describing what the essential concepts of case handling are, and that was like around 2001. There was the first joint paper on this topic. Expect, our simulation engine, after a while, it got embedded in the, let's say, Protos environment and later the BPM environment. And why am I showing you all of these things? I'm showing you all of these things to see that, let's say, such a collaboration can be very successful. As our ideas that we have developed get implemented in tools in industry, and we get lots of new ideas back for that. In 2000, I think in 2006, I'm not completely sure, Anna Carla did her PhD thesis on process mining. The friend of Anna Carla, Peter van der Brandt, we were talking at dinner time after the PhD defense, and he wanted to start a new company. I said, if you want to start a new company, you have to start the company in process mining. And so he did, but he needed, let's say, to have an installed customer base, access to, let's say, potential customers, etc. So he started to collaborate together with Palas Athena, and they kind of started working very tightly together. And by that, all of this process mining technology also ended up in the BPM1 tool of Palas Athena. And then kind of here you can see screenshots and also things that they did to help to promote this, to this vision. Then last year, there was a merger of Palas Athena and Lexmark in a company called Perceptive Software. And kind of all the technologies that I've been talking about have been embedded, let's say, in this new tool set, which is being sold by Perceptive. So I hope that this gives a context of, let's say, how successful such a collaboration can be. Now I would like to switch more to kind of a more visionary view on BPM, and then John will follow up by telling you about his views on that. So what I would like to discuss, and I would like to take a step back, is that in the BPM community we have been discussing these three topics. And in fact, if you look at the presentations today, you can see these topics surfacing in various tools. So I would like to talk a bit about the relationship between these three things. I would like to talk about the link between process flexibility and process mining and process configuration, and closing this circle. So hopefully it is obvious for you to see the relationship between process flexibility and process mining is that if you have processes which are extremely flexible, there is a need to be able to control and to see what is happening and to be able to analyze that. So there's an obvious link between these two things. If you look at process flexibility and process configuration, you can, in a way, view them as being two things that try to achieve the same, but one is, let's say, at a more, let's say, fine-grained time scale, and this is at a more coarse-grained time scale. So you want to be flexible every day, but you do not want perhaps to reconfigure all of your processes every day. And so there is a continuum, and that's reflected by this connection. What specifically in the Kozelog project, which I will mention later, is interesting, is that if you have process configuration, you're talking about a family of processes that are very similar, variants of one another. If they are running in different organizations, that opens up a possibility to compare these different configurations or these different variants of the same process. And that is lifting, let's say, process mining from the analysis of one process to the analysis of multiple processes, and comparing these types of things. That's a whole new research topic that is opening up. Let me tell a bit about flexibility. It's intended like a kind of overview to kind of show you what things have been worked on. What you can see here is a taxonomy which talks about, in one dimension, the time at which flexibility is added. It can be at runtime, it can be at design time. On the other axis, it talks about the impact. Is the impact on a single process instance, or just one case, or is it on a process as a whole, on a process definition? So let me take a look at all of these different types of flexibility. So First, we look at flexibility by definition, that in a way you can find in any BPM tool. It means that you have predefined multiple paths that are possible. And if you look at this kind of model, it will be, you can bypass B, or you can choose the path with B. So this process model allows for 2 possible paths. So it's again already a kind of flexibility. In an extreme case, you could have a process model that would allow for all activities to be executed in any order as many times as you want. And that would be flexibility that you define as such. Nothing surprising. Now we can look at flexibility by deviation. So we have modeled a process that says A should be followed by B, should be followed by C, and then we are done. And flexibility by deviation says that although we have modeled it like that, we can bypass this B. And this is, for example, something that is very well supported by the software of, let's say, Pallas Athena, now Perceptive, which already in a very early state, if we look at an activity, you can define who is allowed to skip it and who is allowed to roll it back. And you can define that for any activity. So you do not need to draw complicated arcs that bypass this. It's just implicitly added. Flexibility by underspecification, a nice example is the worklets approach in YAWL. It means that you have a process model, it's not completely fixed yet. There is kind of this gap in the middle. Now you start executing it. Now you reach the gap. And then at that point in time, you can decide to select an existing process template, or you can decide to model something from scratch. So it depends on the rules that you've set. So for example, it could be that at runtime you bind this to this process and then you're done. So it's another type of flexibility. You have holes in your process model that you kind of fill at runtime. The last one is the one that is most complicated and which triggered, let's say, the most research. And for example, for the people familiar with the ADAPT system, that they will be aware of this this type of approach and the problems that you need to solve to support something like this. This is the approach where I've modeled this process. A should be followed by B, should be followed by C. But now for this single instance, I want to adapt the process and I do not want to do B anymore. So I change the model, I move to this new model and execute it like this. So this seems very simple, but you could also have a process where there are many running cases. Now the process changes. What you should you do with the instances that are there? And in this case, it's kind of clear what you should do, but there is a thing called the dynamic change bug, which is talking about all the problems that this creates. If you make a parallel process sequential, many of the states that you have cannot be mapped onto the new model. So you need to delay or you need to solve it in a different way. Here in Eindhoven, we kind of advocate both procedural models and declarative models. And this is just a model to kind of illustrate the declarative approach, which is supported by our tool Declare. This is a process. So there are 4 activities. So we can eat food, we can drink beer, we can drink wine, we can feel bad as many times as we want. It's a kind of funny example. So this is already a workflow that you can run. You can execute these activities as many times as you want and in any order. So what the declarative approach says, that anything is possible unless it is explicitly forbidden. So now you can add constraints, and we have a graphical constraint language. And you have to realize that these declarative processes are much more flexible, typical than procedural models, which trigger the next activity. So if I explain you this notation, so everybody who is used to drinking alcohol, they know that you should not drink beer and wine at the same time. So that's what this constraint is saying. This constraint is saying that if you want to drink beer, you should make sure that you have eaten food before. And so this is the kind of declarative approach. You add constraints, and by adding constraints, less behavior becomes possible. So I've told you something about, let's say, this flexibility approach. Let's now look at process configuration. And process configuration looks at the following problem. You have 2 process models, which kind of model more or less the same process. But for example, this process model is running within one municipality. This process model is running within another municipality, and there are minor changes because people prefer to do something in a particular way. Another example would be that if you would go to a car rental agency, Hertz, and you would kind of rent a car here at the airport at Schiphol, you would rent it here in the city in Eindhoven, you would rent it at the airport in Brisbane in Australia. It will all be similar, but there will be, let's say, subtle differences between them. In all of these cases, there are two variants of the same process. And we have seen this very nice picture of this cow being the back-end office where all the problems are. It is, of course, stupid to try to support such different variants of the process all separately. So what you should try to do, the same as if, as a child, you want to see what the differences are, you put things on top of each other, and by putting things on top of each other, you kind of see the differences. And then we use this configuration notation. For example, you can block C or you can activate it. You can skip this activity B. If you look at this process model here, B is skipped. And with these basic primitives, you can make a process model configurable. Now you just support this process, and from this you can generate these different variants. I think this is a neglected topic in BPM research and also neglected by, let's say, most of the BPM vendors. People have been talking about reference models, ITIL, the SAP reference model, etc., all very big words, but there is no IT behind it that can actually support it. Configurable process models try to exactly use this vision, but then make it executable. So typical examples, I talked about the Dutch municipalities. There are more than 400 of them. They want to do things different, that's clear. But all of them are also doing similar things. So that would be an ideal example of a configurable, let's say, process model. And we are actually doing that in several projects. Hertz has the amazing number of rental locations. They want to do things differently, but at the back end you want to have one IT system supporting this. We are now in a transition period where we are going to cloud computing, software as a service, etc., etc. Everybody knows the Salesforce example. This will enable sharing, and if you share processes, this will become more important. Related to this is, in my view, in many BPM approaches, content is missing. We are very good at inventing new notations, but we are very bad at making these comprehensive reference models that are actually supporting something at a larger scale. So that is configuration. Now we come to, let's say, process mining. And process mining is looking at processes, but not by modeling them, by inventing how flexibility should be implemented or by making configuration points. Now you look at the actual data and you try to analyze things, and several talks talked about today. To show you how important this is, I am showing several plots of Moore's law. And I assume that everybody knows he was the founder of Intel, and already in the 50s he predicted this exponential growth of the number of transistors on a chip. And so every 2 years, the number of transistors on a chip is doubling. If you look at the size of a hard disk, then you can see this is the growth of a hard disk. Every 1.5 years, the size is doubling. This is the how much, so you can think of how much megabytes do I get per dollar. And then you can see that that amount is, let's say, doubling every, less than every 2 years. That is not including inflation. So the actual number is even higher. So if I make a simple calculation, this is all of human knowledge as it existed in the year 2010. So this is movies, this is the internet, this is music, this is books, this is everything. This is one hard disk, like this one I think I bought in 2010. It has 1 terabyte storage. And now I can apply Moore's law. So if I assume a particular growth rate, I can compute when the whole digital universe of 2010 fits onto this hard disk. So it's a very simple calculation. So I know that the disk needs to grow, let's say 1.2 times 10 to the 9th. That's 2 to the power 30. So I know that I need to double the capacity 30 times. If I kind of take the growth rate that I had before for our hard disk, that is 47 years. So that means that to 2060, your laptop can contain all the digital information that we have today. So if you know this, why would you be drawing process models by hand if you know that there will be real data? If you're interested in analyzing processes, you should look at Moore's law, and you know how important this is. So I call this evidenced BPM, that in the future it will become more and more important. If you want to do BPM, you need to look at the actual event data that are available. So I often use the metaphor of desire lines, olifantenpaden, you call the Dutch elephant trails. So you can see these trails that are left by people, let's say, walking. In information systems, you can see exactly the same for processes. So here you can see logs of this, I think, is the testing of the wafer stepper, very complicated. This is a process within a municipality, and you can see you can extract that from these event logs. You can also do conformance checking, also a picture that I showed earlier. And so people that are kind of building security into information systems, they are trying to do this, not realizing that people are doing that. So the question is how to repair that. So there are many other examples that you can look at. This is a very funny picture, like the people just drive around the barrier that is there. So using conformance checking, you can see where people are actually doing that and how frequent that is. So if you now look at the relationship to flexibility, you can see if you provide flexibility, it becomes very interesting to see what the actual behavior is. So since last year I need glasses to look at things, and I view models as glasses to look at event data. And I think the model-based approach is not just for developing things, but also understanding what is happening in reality, that you can relate event data to these models, and they become like glasses through which you can see what is really happening. So to kind of follow up a bit on these relationships between these, let's say, 3 dimensions, I would like to show you this cube. And in this cube you see a time dimension, you see a location, so you can think of this as departments or different companies, different municipalities, different Hertz offices, and you can think of groups. And these are gold customers, silver customers, invoices about a very big amount, invoices related to a small amount. And if you saw the animation, you could saw that each trace, every case follows a particular path in one of these cells. And for each of these cells, using, for example, process discovery, we can create such a process model. So now we see a cube of models. So we are moving from the situation of looking at a single model to the situation where we look at multiple models. Think about flexibility, think about configuration. We are moving from one model to multiple models. Here you can see some instantiations, the Hertz office that I mentioned before, offices in different cities, different types of customers. You can look at different months, and you can look at the processes in all of these cells and compare them and understand why something is happening at a particular place, at a particular point in time, in a particular way. This is a picture taken from the Kozelog project, where we are working together with 10 municipalities, and also Perceptive is involved in this. There we have the data and we have the process models from 10 Dutch municipalities, and we try to understand why they are doing things differently and which municipalities are successful because they do things in a particular way. So again, it fits nicely into this cube. I was in Brisbane when it got flooded last year. There is a company called Suncorp. It has all of these brands. They are all owned by Suncorp. All of these brands offer multiple types of insurance. And in the Australian assurance business, you often need to change your processes because of disasters. And here you can see that you can nicely instantiate the cube. And it's interesting to see why processes in a particular element of this cube are in a particular way. So what's in it for research? What can we do with this kind of more broader vision on BPM and relating these types of concepts? We can look at the following two questions, and I do not have the time to elaborate on that. One question is, how can we detect, if we look at this axis, that things change? And one of the postdocs in our group, J.C. Bose, is working on this topic of concept drift. So you can give him a log, and he will identify at what points in time the process that is like logged in that event log, when it changed. And then you can compare the process model before the change and the process model after the change, and you can highlight where the changes have taken place. I think this is very interesting in many applications, where you're not so much interested in, let's say, the steady state situation, but that you want to see how processes respond to certain things. Another example, and this is a slide with a lot of text and words, but what you have to realize is in this COSALOG project, we have 8 process models and event data of 8 processes of 10 different municipalities. So we can compare all of these things together. So we build matrices where we look at how similar are processes from one municipality compared to the other municipality. And then we look at all kinds of key performance indicators to try to understand why things are going better or worse in a particular setting. Unfortunately, I do not have time to elaborate on that. I hope that I managed to show you that in BPM research you have these, let's say, 3 very nice interrelated areas where it's nice to do research and to combine these different views. To conclude, I would like to go back to the timeline that I showed you earlier. So I stopped in 2011 when Pallas Athena joined Perceptive. We are now in 2012, and there's also something about to happen which is not completely official, but is about to become completely formalized. And that is that there will be a research center here at this university, let's say, supported by Perceptive. And Hajo will be kind of the main person behind it, and it shows the continuing, let's say, collaboration between both universities. So now I would like to hand over to John.
First start with the most important thing.
The power. Of heb je eigen?
Okay, thank you all. You're still sitting here after a long day of a lot of theory. I will discuss a lot of the topics that Will has introduced and focus more on the business value. But first I'd like to express my enthusiasm about this cooperation between the university and our company. When we were still Pallas Athena, we were aware that working together with the university is a win-win situation. Both learn, we can improve our products, we could never do the kind of research that is applicable within a university. And I think visiting some of the BPM conferences that are in the academic world, a lot of research is too far away from practice. I've seen discussions about transitions of BPMN to BIPL and 20 people discussing minor details that are totally irrelevant for the practical field. So this cooperation is really beneficial, and since the acquisition of Palace Athena by Perceptive Software, we are now part of a bigger organization that has the means and the willingness to extend this collaboration. So with the new setup, we are now able to dive into research topics that for us as a company are very, very relevant, focusing particularly on all kinds of aspects related to execution and making use of the knowledge and the expertise of the university here in Eindhoven. I want to discuss process configuration, and more from a conceptual point of view. Today we have seen a lot of people talking about process flexibility, mapping out process, designing processes in such a way that you're able to identify variations in a very simple way. Understanding variations, understanding complex processes that can be decomposed into thousands of activities. And when we discuss process configuration, we are trying to build an execution layer that is able to cope with all these kinds of variations. And I think there are two ways of doing this. The first one could be by object substitution. It means that within a common process, particular variations are going to be explicitly modeled in such a way that based on the context or variables, a particular choice is made of which of the alternative configurations is going to be called during execution. So that is more or less substitution. The other way that you could approach this is that you have one definition, and the one definition contains alternative process behaviors by parameterization. So instead of having multiple variations, you have one definition that contains these variations and that you can make work, define the behavior by configuration. So let's have a look at the BPM cycle. Everybody knows this one. It's about agility. The idea is that if you use BPM, you become more agile. And the reason you can become agile is you design a process, you put it into execution, then you measure how the process is performing, for instance, using process mining. You do an analysis, and then you redesign your process. And the promise of BPM vendors is then you can do that faster than if you would use a traditional system. Well, that is to be questioned. The design that you do, by definition, always works on the enterprise level. So if you have an organization with a lot of variations in your organization, in your processes, different departments using different variations, you still have to design those variations at enterprise level. And that is complicated. Even if you have configurable tools, you have to understand these variations and you have to put them into an into a design that can be executed. This execution layer, in many situations, is always tightly integrated with the IT infrastructure. A BPM system is not a standalone system. It integrates with SAP or with an EMR or with what kind of other systems there are. We have seen examples where one particular process integrates with 20 other applications. And the integration is part of the process design as well. That means that if there are variations in the integrations, those variations become part of the design as well. And this, as a consequence, brings the ownership of this kind of process change in the hands of IT. Even if we don't want it, even if we provide the tools that are easy to use, that you can really design a process easily, push a button and put it into execution. Because of this complexity of integrating such a system into an IT landscape, there is no IT manager who will allow to have a business user go to that design, redesign his process, and put it into execution. And as a result, I skipped that one. As a result, adaptation of a process becomes now part of a release scheme, ITIL, whatever. So even if it was possible to have instant change, this problem makes that changes will be occurring twice or 3 times a year. That is what we see in our practice. So how can you find alternative ways to cope with this problem? So let's have a look at university. And within Perceptive, there are a lot of customers in the higher education area. And if you, for instance, look at 2 campuses on this particular university, you see that both have admission departments and they both have admission processes. And probably they have their own variation of handling admissions. So the consequence of this is that those variations needs to be explicitly modeled by configuration or by other ways, but you have to be sure, if you're using substitution, that both variations are part of the design. Let's have a look at a system here in the Netherlands. Our Justice Department had a very old system, and I think it was in 1997. They spent 4 years on creating a workflow system that was able to cope 6,000 users, being judges, prosecutors, administrators, over 21 distributed courts, each having their own local variations. And given the status of tools in those days, they too were forced either to map out completely 21 different processes for each court, but every court has at least 15 different processes to take care of as part of prosecution. So in an instance, it's exploding the number of versions. And if you bring a new version to running systems, that keeps expanding. So before you know it, you have hundreds and hundreds of different process variations in your system. And in 2001, they decided to cancel the project. It was a big political rumor here in the Netherlands. And they spent 28 million in building this workflow system. And it was caused by the fact that even with substitution, they were forced to model every exception by design. So what if you could become more agile, not by design explicitly, but by parameterization? And with that I mean, what if it was possible that you design a process, add all kinds of parameters to this process, and make sure that the operational behavior of this process is controlled in a separate configuration environment? Then you would create a design cycle where the main design still takes a lot of time, where the integration points are being designed on beforehand, but when at runtime, in the execution layer, by configuration, you can change the operational behavior of the system. So the localized variations can become localized in runtime. And changes that can be applied by business users, because they're only able to affect the parameters, have instant effect. There is no release schedule available or necessary anymore. And the throughput time of these changes, of course, rapidly decreases. And finally, we achieve what has been the promise of BPM for such a long time: putting the business in control, making them independent of the IT process. So what kind of things you can think of when you talk about this kind of parameterization? And a number of those are already implemented, a number of those still have to be implemented, and still a lot of research has to be done in order to make this all work. But you can think of distribution, for instance. There are a lot of BPM systems where the swim lane is part of the definition. Swim lane meaning transferring work from a person, to a role, a group to a group. So the distribution of work actually becomes part of the process definition. As a consequence, if you change that distribution, you will have to change the design, and you're back at your top-hand side. You're fixed, you're stuck into a release cycle. It's possible to take the distribution out of your models and use parameterization to make those configurable. The same with workload balancing, prioritization, authorizations, roles, skip and redo. Will was referring to a capability in one of our options is, why not think of more ways, more parameters associated with an activity that influence the capability of users based on their experience and authorization to differ from the predefined path. You can always change and tweak it when it's running, but you don't have to take into account all these exceptions at design time. And you can think of deadlines, SLAs, output generation, integration points, etc. And some people say, oh, we can do that. There are rules. You have your process model. On every arc and decision point, you define parameters. Those are rules. You put them in a rule system. And now we are able to control this organization by changing the rules. But it's not as simple as that. If you look at a number of processes in large organizations, this ability, for instance, the skip and redo is a nice example. It needs to be part of the process model itself. It needs to be part of the engine. The engine needs to understand the meaning of those parameters and what it means. It needs to act if those parameters are being changed. So it needs to be part of your model. It needs to be part of your language. And the complexity isn't going away. The thing is, the complexity moves away from the hard-coded process design to a configuration environment. So you have to provide this configuration environment to your business users. And that brings the need for contextual configuration. Because an organization is a large organization, consists of a number of levels, a number of departments. Think of the cube of Will. A lot of geographical locations, multiple brands, and each of those characteristics can define the necessity to be able to create your own variations. So you need to think of the design and the configuration environment. The design will still be at the enterprise context, the enterprise level. It's an overspanning design that takes care of the process that is valid for all the organizational units in such an organization. And with your configuration, you can modify that. But this configuration needs to be decentralized in departments, for instance, because within an enterprise, there can be multiple sites. Could be countries, could be departments, whatever. And the ability to change the operational behavior within those sites needs to be with managers who work in these particular sites. They must be able to configure the behavior of the process without being able to change the behavior of the process of other organizational units. And within that organizational unit, there might be subcontexts. It might be that a particular department manager needs to control the variations in his department. And whatever he is doing might be overruled by somebody who's higher in the organization. So you can already see that is a very complicated structure in order to make this work. And then finally, if you make the combination with the ability to override predefined definitions based on authorization at the instance level, then you have a fantastic, flexible, real flexible, agile BPM system. And this is what solved the problem in the Justice Department. We are now about 7-8 years further, and till today, 7.6 million prosecutions have been handled by this BPM system. Now, I want to make the link between this kind of parameterization, this kind of configuration, and cloud. What if we bring this capability to the cloud? What does it mean? I found a quote from a guy, I don't know who he is, to be honest. He writes children's books. But he said, whatever we possess becomes of double value when we have the opportunity of sharing it with others. And I tweaked it a little bit, so I now always say, whatever we process becomes of double value when we have the opportunity of sharing it with others. What does it mean? Looking at cloud, originally we were building systems like this. So we have a hardware platform, we have a software operating system, we have a BPM system on top of it, and within the BPM system, we're creating a lot of processes for our organization, our own processes. And then we get other organizations, and maybe they use templates, similar kind of processes that we sell to those organizations, but they still have their own system, their own hardware, etc. And then cloud comes in and we start with hosting. We provide a generic platform on which we run different BPM systems or different software systems. So we share the hardware and then we share the operating software. And now we are at the stage where we see vendors offering BPM systems in a multi-tenant way. So a BPM engine that is being shared by multiple tenants, and this BPM engine can be scaled, it's elastic. If we have a new version, everybody benefits from this new version. We have other ways of pricing these solutions, but still we see that individual organizations are creating their own modules within the strict boundaries of the tenants. What if we would be able to share processes, configurable processes as well? So we have not only sharing the hardware and the software and the BPM system, we're also sharing the actual process execution itself. So multiple organizations are executing the same process in a multi-tenant shared way. That would give us the opportunity, whenever we think it's appropriate and necessary, to open a door between two tenants, where we can use the same process execution, where we have multiple organizations working together on the same workload. So we are now able to share and distribute a process between organizations, and the BPM system for that situation will control the work within two different organizations. Who would do that? Who would like to use that? Daimler is producing cars. We've seen the complexity. Ford is producing cars. ING, very complicated mortgages. Deutsche Bank, very complicated mortgages. Apple, iPads, Microsoft Surface. I'm joking, of course. Nobody is going to think that these organizations will share their processes, because their process is their competitive value. They will never go into a situation like this. But what if we look at that university with that admission process? Probably there are other universities with admission processes. It's very feasible that in these kind of environments, two universities, when one has a problem in having the resources to take care of that flow of new students, that another one in another part of the world has available capacity for that particular process, and the process is shared. We open the door between the tenants, and now that other university can assist in the processes still belonging to the context of the other university. This is very feasible. It probably is feasible for organizations that are not competing with each other, like municipalities. I think the example that we have here in the Netherlands is a beautiful one. Non-profit organizations, probably in healthcare, there are areas where we could deploy this. It could be even used as a solution for very large organizations within those organizations. Think of multinationals. Think of all kinds of organizations that have shared service centers, servicing multiple organizations within their organization for finance, for instance, or HR. Think of business process outsourcing. Outsourcers. Think of organizations with multiple labels, like it's Suncorp. And finally, organizations that are part of a value chain might benefit from these kind of capabilities as well. That was what I had to share with you. I have one final consideration. I think we all know this book as BPM Adapts, Theory of Constraints. Particularly for Will, I created a little Petri net showing how we had to get our coffee. And I would really propose to study the theory of constraints and come up with another setting next time, so we don't have to stand in the queue for the coffee for that long. Thank you very much.
So a lot of trouble to show you one more slide. One moment. So, it's my honor to give you some concluding remarks, and perhaps you already got some hints of things that interest me beyond BPM. If you don't get it by now, then you probably won't. What I like to do is to when looking back at the day, to use this football, which has a very nice logo on it of the university, to use it a bit as a metaphor of things that I've heard and perhaps you recognize. In Dutch we say the ball is circular, and that's very trivial. You would probably agree with me. But we say this to express that things can go many different directions and you wouldn't know beforehand. And that is something which I think permeates from a lot of the stories that we heard, where you have listened to industrial partners, academic partners working on topics, and where it's actually open whether particular solutions will work, and if they work, how they will work in the best possible way. You've seen a lot of these struggles today. You've seen different, I would say, different endeavors which are in different stages of maturity. Some of the things you've heard are preliminary, some of the things are much more mature. But of course, the fun of working together between industry and academia is that there are these topics where you're actually interested in a particular outcome, but you don't know how the ball will actually, how it will bounce. That's one thing. The other thing is, for me, it's perhaps less pleasant, but the ball is, of course, also a part in a particular team sport that I really like, and it's not always possible to win everything that you like. But one thing that is very important, and I think it's very important on a European scale, is that it is often also a team sport. So one thing that we try to foster with this kind of collaborations in the BPM Roundtable is that we more or less grow aware of all the things that are happening at all these centers, at all these expertise centers all throughout Europe, to mobilize knowledge between an exchange of information between all these centers. And that is also, and I want to acknowledge that again, the support of the ICT labs, the EIT ICT labs, which helped fund today's event. That is the, let's say, the goal of that organization, to make us more competitive as a continent, as the European continent. Having said all this, I want to invite all the speakers who are still here to come down. because we want to give you a small present. So we have already thanked you as audience. Now let's also thank the speakers again. We tried not to be mean, not to give them an inflated ball, but to give them a flat one to take home. Florian, thank you. Thank you very much. Let's thank the speakers one more time. Unless somebody wants an inflated ball, of course, because we can have a game if you like. Jaron, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Michael. There you go. There you go. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, John. Yeah, this is for, yeah, it's okay. Yeah. Okay, we've come to an end. I invite everybody to join us for the drinks. Thanks for coming over. Thanks for making this a very nice day. Thanks to you all. Bye.